Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Addams Family, Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt for the NES, brought to us by Ocean. Addams Family, Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt is actually a direct sequel to the original Addams Family game on the NES. The SNES version of the game that was released is a little bit different. This one pretty much uses the exact same maps and areas as the original Addams Family game. Interesting to note, though, about the game, it was originally released in Europe prior to coming out in North America, and as you can see from the cover art of the game, it is actually based on the animated series for the Addams Family that was on in the early 90s, instead of the Addams Family movie that was released a little bit before that, and what the first game was based on. So here we go with Addams Family, Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt for the NES. In the game, of course, you play as Pugsley, and you're trying to go around and save your family. Your family's been kidnapped by the different bosses of the game, and by defeating them, you end up rescuing them. There's also a few other bosses in the game that end up giving you a few extra things, like extra hearts. When we start off the game, we're going to grab ourselves a few extra lives before actually traveling into the individual stages. Basically, the house itself works like a giant hub, and then you go into the different doors of the house in order to enter different levels or different areas. There's a few different branching paths overall, but for the most part the game's pretty straightforward. Your controls, of course, are very simple, of moving and being able to jump on top of enemies in order to do damage to them, as you'll be doing to all the bosses in the game. After going through the chimney and grabbing some extra lives, we'll come up here to this invisible room, which is Pugsley's room, that has a couple of extra lives. They do not respawn, but the heart and the shoe power-up in here do respawn. The shoe power-up makes you move faster. It also counts as an extra hit. When you get hit, when you have the shoe, you just lose the shoe power for that moment, and you'll have to get it back. After getting that and the shoe, we come out here to fight the first boss of the game, the giant bird. You'll notice that a lot of the bosses are the exact same as they were on the Addams Family original NES game. All you gotta do is wait for the bird to swoop down and then jump on top of him, and after you've defeated all his health, you will end up getting a heart power-up. You will also get a password. In the SNES version, the only time you can get password is by defeating a boss, whereas in this game, if you pause it at any time, you can get another password. We're then going to come up here to the upper right corner and go to the left first. This is the kitchen area, and we're going to be exploring this later on in the game, but for now we're coming here over to the left side and entering a boss battle against the giant snowman. This boss, just like the bird, will end up granting us another piece of heart health. We're going to get the last heart, so we have 5 total, before we actually start rescuing the family members of the Addams Family. Another thing you've obviously probably noticed is there's no music in the game. For some reason, they decided not to put a soundtrack. Other than the opening Addams Family theme that plays at the beginning of the game, there's no music in the actual game itself. Of course, there are plenty of sound effects, so you're consistently hearing them, but overall, there is no music. Also, in the SNES version of the game, not only are things a lot different, you also had sub-weapons you could get in the game. This version, however, eliminates those sub-weapons. It also has shorter areas, as well as a few areas cut from the SNES version. Interesting to note also is the Game Boy version of the game has even more cut from it, and has even less levels. Over here, while we're traveling over to the left, we have to actually climb up here, so we're going to jump on this flying fly, hit the switch so now it's in its off position, and then head back over to the right. When we do that, we can see that the door is now open over here. Once in here, jump on top of the fly so you can climb up to the top and go through this door. If you're having trouble jumping on the fly, you can keep going over to the right in that area, and eventually you'll come to a switch that will make hidden blocks appear so you can climb up them to that door. Always watch out for the bombs on the ground. Sometimes they look like hams to me, and I thought they were health at first, but they are bombs, and of course after a few seconds of being on screen, they will explode. For the most part, enemies die in a single hit when you jump on them. Some take more than one hit, but you're defeating them all pretty much the same way. Hit detection in the game can be an issue, that's for sure. Sometimes you'll look like you'll land on an enemy, and sometimes you actually will land on an enemy, but you will also take damage, which can definitely be frustrating. Use these vines and slowly work your way over to the right side and fight the giant spider boss. The spider boss moves back and forth at the top, dropping down, spitting little spiders out, 6 at a time, and then goes back up. He has a decent amount of health, more health than any of the bosses we've already previously fought. But all you have to do is wait for him to come down and jump on him. And as you can see, if you time it right, you can actually jump on him 2 times sometimes, each time he comes down. After grabbing the next heart piece, go through the right side, and now we're in another area, and it's time to start hunting down the family members and rescuing them. There's no particular order in the game in order to defeat the bosses and save the family members. You can pretty much do them in any order except for Morticia, who you have to defeat the other bosses and save the other family members before the door that she's behind will open. That door is located on the first floor of the main hub of the house. If you try to enter it at any point prior to that, it'll just say that the door is locked. I'm not even sure if the game mentions that you get a key or that the door becomes unlocked after you've saved all the other family members, but I could be wrong. In this room, be very careful when on these moving platforms. Of course, they're going to possibly push you off down to the spikes. If you do fall on the spikes, you thankfully only lose 1 heart. You don't instantly die or anything. You also have to be careful because there's spikes lining all types of different areas throughout here. You'll have to do some really short jumps to get in between the pillars while going over here. There's a lot of spikes in this area, so you want to be sure to also avoid the bomb here, and then go through the door at the very end, and you'll be inside the graveyard. Above you in the graveyard will be a jack-o'-lantern throwing down fireballs your direction, but if you keep running, you'll outrun it, no problem. There's also a few giant plants that will spit out projectiles, as well as the normal zombie type and bunny enemies. All you have to do is work your way over to the right, eventually coming to this mausoleum, and then go inside of it in order to fight this giant hobgoblin ogre guy. This guy kind of works like the spider as far as the 6 projectiles he consistently shoots out, but he moves a little slower and fires a little faster than that spider did, but still gives you plenty of opportunities in order to jump on his head and get rid of his health. Once you've gotten rid of all his health, you have now saved Wednesday, and we can go and start saving the next member of the family. After exiting out of the mausoleum, continue in the graveyard over to the right, you'll find a big heart, and near that, you'll be able to duck down and go below the ground. It can be a little bit tricky to actually find that particular spot. Once you're down here, start working your way over to the left, drop down into the water down below, and then swim over to the left side and pop back out. Basically, we're trying to get back to the house, and you could either go backwards all the way through the areas we already traveled to, or you can go through the graveyard and the underground like this, which is a much quicker and easier path. On the second screen of the underground, work your way up a little bit, keep climbing, avoiding some of the killer rabbits and a few other enemies that are in this area. There's a couple of bad enemies at the top here, but just work your way down. Watch out for this rabbit. And then, finally, work your way up one more time, and eventually you'll be able to get out of the graveyard itself. Once out of the graveyard, now the giant scary tree, head over to the right and enter the door to go back inside of the house. Once I'm back inside the house, we're going to go up to the second floor and enter into this room. One of the weirdest enemies in the game is here, as you have not only weird jouster-like guys, look almost like directly out of the game Joust, you also have random monkeys on unicycles of all things. Ride the moving platform over to the right so you can avoid landing on the spikes, and when you get over here, you'll have to jump off the second platform in order to make it over. In the lower right here, if you've lost your shoe power-up, you can grab another one, then ride the platform up, and then hold right and run over to get onto the right side. There's a few other openings during this segment, past a bunch of spikes, but just ignore them and keep going right on the normal path, and eventually you'll exit out and go to the second room of this. The second room is definitely tougher. You have knight enemies that are going to keep throwing swords at you that work like boomerangs that come back to them, as well as giant knight statues that have a giant swinging mace ball. There's a lot of monkeys as well as knights that are going to come at you. Just keep moving. That's all you got to keep doing. After a little bit, you may come to a pit or two that you'll have to jump over. You can actually use the knights themselves. When you make it over this side, you're going to have to jump up and hit the box so that you get rid of the stuff blocking your way, and then just keep going. Over here, what you'll have to do is wait for the moving platform to come back to you, get on top of it, and then duck down so that you can go, of course, across. You'll then have to jump up and over, and duck again in order to get to the end of it, and then finally you'll be on some safe ground again. Watch out for this monkey, hit the switch that allows it to come back, so now you can actually use that to jump up to get to the top area in order to go to the next screen. Once over here, you'll start off with a few ghosts that you'll have to use in order to get over the pit. Be sure to hit the box here so that you actually get these platforms to appear, so you can then make it over the pit. You can, of course, jump through the pit. You'll lose a little bit of health, but of course you'd rather hit the switch. Over here, find the hidden block, and then get on top of the hidden block in order to hit another switch that'll allow 2 little blocks to appear over the previous spike pit. That way we could actually get over it. There's a lot of enemies coming at you during this segment. Thankfully, there is some health along the way. Duck underneath all the pendulums of the swinging clocks, and you'll make it to the Guillotine Room. Here, of course, there's some giant guillotines, so be sure to jump over them or wait for them to go all the way back up before attempting to go past them. Also, on just about every platform during that segment, there's going to either be one of the monkeys or another one of those knights throwing his sword at you. Bounce on the ghost to get over, then hit the switch. That way you can actually keep moving. Be sure to grab the power up for the shoes so that you get an extra free hit as well as speed. And then continue past more of the guillotines. I have to say that the weird thing of not having any music in the game definitely is kind of unsettling, as well as just kind of makes the game worse than what it probably would be considered. I mean, not an amazing little platformer here, and it was released pretty late in the NES on 1993, but with the addition of just a little bit of music, it would have made the game a heck of a lot more interesting. Be sure to grab the whirly hat so you can actually fly over all the spikes. While flying, you'll also have to go under or in between 2 giant moving spike squares as well. Eventually, you'll be able to land safely, pick up some health that's much needed if you've been hitting a lot of the spikes on the ceiling, or these spike squares as well. Definitely a pretty tight area with the bearskin rug spitting at you, bombs, as well as other enemies, so just try to be careful while going through this. This set of areas and rooms is definitely the longest in the game. There's none of the other areas that you'll travel to are nearly as lengthy as this one. There's a one up here. If you really want to get it, you can go back and hit the switch and come back to it. But there's really not a necessarily need for it since there's so many other one-ups available for you. While this version is definitely mediocre or worse, the SNES version I do enjoy slightly more. It plays very similar to the Addams Family SNES game, but I definitely find more enjoyment with that one. And even though I like both Addams Family and Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt for SNES, it's actually Addams Family Values that I like the most. In this room, you'll make it to the giant library. There's going to be little books trying to run around, as well as bookworms scurrying all about the actual ground. Take whatever road you want to take through this, whether staying close to the ground or climbing on top of the books, and eventually you'll come to an opening, then go to another screen. It'll actually be kind of weird. It feels like the whole game will actually be looping a little bit, because just the next few rooms look extremely similar to one another inside the library itself. There's a door located up there that we're going to ignore and just keep working your way over to the right. Eventually you'll be able to pick up another one of the whirly hats and actually fly your way through a large majority of the library here. There's no real threats here either. There's no spikes that are all lining up on the ceiling and all, so I'm not exactly sure why they even give you the hat during this segment, but it's always fun to kind of fly around. Like I said, the next room looks pretty much identical to the one we were just in, but trust me, it actually is a different room. I had to actually go and make sure that I wasn't kind of looping as I made my way through. One weird thing in the game is that there's actually little spider webs in the corners of the screen. They're not on every single room, as we'll enter the next room with the train. There won't be any of those in the corners, but just kind of a weird little effect they do. The train area, well, you're going to be riding on a train, and along the way there's a lot of spikes. All kinds of spikes. Some that you'll have to jump in between, some you'll have to jump over, some you'll have to duck underneath. You can actually climb on the smokestack at the front of the train in order to duck down over certain ones, jump over other ones that are a little bit too high. You'll also have to jump back to the regular train itself so you can duck under certain ones. Also, you'll probably be relatively low on health at this point, so be careful while going through that you don't lose all your heart, so you'll have to repeat the room, of course. After seeing a giant arrow made of these spikes, you know that you're at the end of the room. Just ride a train a little bit longer and you'll come to a door and it's time for the next boss fight. This is the most interesting boss in the game. It's a giant witch that will fire out projectiles straight down at you. Get, of course, past or in between the projectiles, and then what you have to do is when she does dive down, you won't be able to jump directly on her. You'll actually have to jump on Uncle Fester's head in order to get high enough into the air in order to hit the witch. Once you're able to drain her health, you have saved Uncle Fester, and you can move on to the next family member. We have 2 more family members to save before we can actually go and save Morticia. Climb up to the top floor and enter the left door. Here is kind of the punishment room. There's giant maces, guillotines, and other rotating spiky death that you'll have to deal with while jumping through. Thankfully, at least early on, there's not a whole lot of other regular enemies, so your goal is just to jump in between all the different perils. The little green hooded executioner enemies spit out giant rotating axe-like weapons, so be careful from them. Jump over them and then jump on their head. After a few seconds, the thing will retract back to them like a boomerang, so you'll have to be careful from both ends. When you see the giant cannons, the one facing to the right, be sure to jump on its projectile in order to get up higher so you can get past the next room. When you get to that door, go through the top opening. Even though it's an invisible door, you want to go through that one. It'll take you to another room, in which case you'll enter the right door, and you'll go to another area similar to the first one. Except now we have boxes that have springs in them. The arrow pointing up into the air signifies that, of course, the spring will throw you upwards. A few cannons at the end of the room, then enter another door. Here, just walk across and enter into the next door, and you'll be in the third room of the punishment chamber. Here, you'll have to use a spring at the very beginning to climb up. Be careful of the cannons that are firing from both sides, and a few bombs right after that. Here, you'll have to wait for the right timing in order to jump on the cannonball to get over the spiky pit. After 2 cannons that you'll have to use their projectiles to get over, you'll eventually come to another door, and it's time for another boss fight. For this boss, you have an executioner head that's moving up and down. He has a lot of weapons rotating around him. After a few seconds or so, he'll throw out all those weapons in whatever direction they're currently facing. He always has an opening on him, though, that you can jump on him to take away his health, and after you defeat him, you've saved Gomez. We now have to only save Granny before we can go save Morticia. Once back into the main house, to get to where Granny is, we're going into the upper right door. Now, we were in here earlier, but we went left through the kitchen in order to get the extra heart. We're now going to the right side and going through the main part of the kitchen itself. Over here, you'll notice the giant furnace, but you won't be able to get into it. So what you'll have to do is climb up here, watching out for the rotating teacup enemies, and hit the switch in the upper left corner. And once you've done this, that will eliminate the wall blocking the actual entrance to the furnace. So work your way back down and hit duck on the actual furnace, and you'll go down. The furnace area, of course, is pretty fiery. There's a lot of fire spewing from the walls. In this main area of here, you'll have a rotating fire spark that moves around the platform, as well as you'll have little jumping fireballs as well. Fire will spew out from the ground itself, and you'll also have to be very careful. Anytime you see the pipes, prepare for fire to come out. Other than that, relatively straightforward area, and this is actually a good recommending starting point if you want to complete this area earlier on in the game, as it's one of the easier areas to explore in the game. At the end of the room though, it's time to fight the giant fire dragon. He moves around in a figure 8 pattern, and all you have to do is jump on his head. Every so often, he'll spit out 3 projectiles, fire-esque, that will go and do a spread shot down below. These are easily able to be get in between or dodge altogether, and then you just keep jumping on his head. Once he's defeated, you save Granny and all the other family members that you can before you have to fight the main boss of the game. Thankfully, right after the dragon, there's a few extra lives, and then enter the door. It'll put you back out into the main area of the kitchen, so you'll have to actually travel back to the left in order to go through the door. Now we head back down to the first floor and go through the door that was currently locked at the beginning of the game. In here you have a lot of metal chains hanging down. Jump across the gap over to the right and enter the door. When you make it over here, just fall down in between the spikes and you'll land into a series of water. There's a little bit of piranhas moving back and forth, but they don't chase you down thankfully, so just work your way around them. After a while, you will eventually be able to pop out of the water and go through another door. Once out here, jump to the chain on the left side. Do a little short jump in between the 2 sets of spikes to get over to the left side and hit a switch. Once you've hit the switch, fall back down and jump in between the spikes once again, and now go back to the front door that you were just in. Once over here, you can now climb upwards. Climb up, use the platforms to help you, and then go through the door. Here, go to the right side, jumping from chain to chain, being careful not to lose too much health on the actual spikes. Here you'll have to do a little unique jump to get into the gap that's not spike filled, and go through the door on the right side, eventually going through another area before falling a long way down. Be careful not to hit, of course, the spikes on the walls, and then enter the door on the right side when you do land. Here you'll see a lot of money, and then enter the door on the right for the final boss battle against the judge. The judge jumps back and forth, and every so often the ground will shake when he jumps, causing a whole bunch of mallets to fall down. Get in between all his gavels that do fall down, or just take a hit or two here and there, and keep jumping on his head. Once he's defeated, you have saved all the family members, and you have completed Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt. So, there you have it. That was the entire game of Addams Family Pugsley'S Scavenger Hunt. The credits will now start to actually play through, and you can enjoy them as, at least for now, there's a little bit of music again. Well, not a terrible game overall. It could have definitely been a lot better. They could have added music, they could have flushed out the game a little more, and they could have made it a little bit more different than the original Addams Family game for the NES as well. Overall, not too terrible, but definitely not memorable, and with a lot of other great late NES titles, it's no wonder that this one really isn't talked about. And with the other Addams Family game being probably slightly better overall, and heck, even Fester's Quest being pretty decent, that this one definitely is the worst of the 3 Addams Family games available for the Nintendo Entertainment System. When the credits finish up, you'll see the end. You can then press the button in order to go back to the main menu, or just wait a little bit, and then you can start the game all over again. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.